All right, ladies and gentlemen, today we've got somebody I'm really excited to talk with because he's a filmmaker and a bit of a journalist, and he's been uncovering some let's say, unsatisfactory history about Canada, who everybody thinks is kind of a polite and pleasant country. This docuseries was pretty intense. You can see it at truthtothepowerless.com. Pitasanna, well, say your name for everybody at home.
I go by Pita. That's what my friends call me, Pitasanna. If you feel courageous.
Yeah. Well, yeah. If your name's hard to say, I'd love to have you on the show because chances are you're awesome. Speaking Truth to Powerless, this is a 6-part documentary series about Canada, its industries, and it has such speakers as Noam Chomsky and numerous other politicians and writers and things of that nature. So, ugly parts of Canada for sure. What exactly made you want to start this topic and make the series, first off?
So I was born and raised in Canada, Toronto, Canada. I did my schooling in Toronto. I did my university studies at the University of Toronto and my graduate studies at the Monk School, at the University of Toronto's Monk School, which is like a leading foreign policy institution in Canada. So the Monk School, it was founded by, it was the main donor of the Monk School is Peter Monk. And Peter Monk is the founder of Barrick Gold, which is the largest gold mining company in the world. And, Barrick Gold has committed horrendous atrocities. The mining company has committed horrendous atrocities in Latin America. It's Barrick Gold hired security forces, have raped villagers, have poisoned ecosystems, have just completely devastated the places that they've been in. And Peter Monk, this individual, is the guy who significantly funded the Monk School, of which I'm a graduate of. So that's my education, really about. So I'm very much a product of the establishment education system. So, as a product of that system, when we were in school about foreign policy, we would kind of learn about how Canada is this peaceful and benevolent country, how Lester B. Pearson, Canada's former prime minister, how he had introduced peacekeeping into the world because of what he did in the Suez crisis. He won a Nobel Peace Prize. So, that is this glowing kind of characterization of Canada's foreign policy, which we learned in school. So, and to the extent that we were exposed to something critical about Canada, it had to do with like our treatment of the indigenous people. That was really, but even that wasn't as substantive or as in-depth as it should be. But to the extent that there's criticism about Canada, that's kind of just it. So that's my education. How I became exposed to content critical of Canada's foreign policy is I stumbled on a work by this Canadian writer by the name of Yves Engler. And I was one day sitting in the airport. I was going through my social media feed, and I come across this article about Lester B. Pearson. Lester B. Pearson, this peacekeeper, it's God, So I clicked the article, and it's like the title of the article is like This Myth of Lester B. Pearson or something like that. And I'm reading the article, and it's talking about, how Lester B. Pearson supported the U.S. war in Vietnam, how Lester B. Pearson was instrumental in the partition of Palestine, which instrumental in the creation of the state of Israel, which led to the dispossession, the expulsion of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. So this was like a mind-blowing revelation. So, and then I just became just immersed into the works of this writer, Yves Engler. I then read his book. He had released a book, which I had never heard of at the time, but it was called The Black Book of Canadian Foreign Policy, which is like a huge collection of work about Canada's atrocities in all these countries and everything that they've done. Just a phenomenal piece of work, The Black Book of Canadian Foreign Policy. So I read that and my mind was just kind of blown. So that was like my real substantive education about, really the horrendous atrocities Canada's committed. And then fast forward, how I actually came to do this docuseries is that was several years later after I had been exposed to Yves Engler's work. I had stumbled upon this documentary by a filmmaker by the name of Elaine Briere, and she had done a documentary called The Sellout of East Timor, which looked at Indonesia's invasion and occupation of East Timor and Canada's support for Indonesia during that time. And we actually discussed this in our docuseries as well, Canada's support for Indonesia during its occupation of East Timor. Indonesia's occupation of East Timor led to the slaughter of a quarter of its population. It's relative to population, it's the worst atrocity in post-World War II history. So, and Canada was supporting Indonesia. Canada had mining interests in Indonesia. Canada was providing Indonesia with arms. So, Canada saw Indonesia, this developing nation, as a significant economic powerhouse that they could just invest and generate money with. So they weren't willing to criticize Indonesia's atrocities in East Timor. That the economic relationship was too valuable. So Elaine Briere's documentary was documenting all of these atrocities, which was that was the first documentary, to my knowledge, that has ever been released, which showed Canada's foreign policy, an element of Canada's foreign policy, in a critical light. This was released in 1996. Then I found out about another documentary, which was released much later, called Myths for Profit. And it was done by a filmmaker by the name of Amy Miller and was more broader in scope. It kind of, looked at Canada's as a war imperialist, neoliberal, state. So it was more broader in scope. And so those two documentaries, I found them to be fascinating. However, what I noticed was these two documentaries only interviewed, activists and critics of Canada's foreign policy. These two documentaries never interviewed, politicians, ambassadors, diplomats, the individuals responsible for formulating and championing Canada's foreign policy. So I thought, hey, that's the first time where an idea came to my head. I was like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if there was a documentary that interviewed the politicians responsible for formulating Canada's foreign policy, executing, championing, promoting Canada's foreign policy, as well as academics, dissidents, activists challenging what those politicians are saying. So that's when the idea to do such a documentary first came to my head. And I had befriended a filmmaker by the name of Ryan Ellis, and we had gone along very well. One day, Ryan, told me, I'm looking to invest in a project. I'm looking to start like a film. Do you have any ideas of any film or documentary kind of thing you want to do? And I told him, yeah, I do want to do a documentary about Canada's foreign policy, but I want to interview the politicians as well as the academics and activists. And I pitched this to him in April of 2019. And from there, we began this long journey where, the end result is what you see before you now.
So what difficult was it to get some of these certain politicians? Obviously, journalists and activists are more willing to talk because they want to get the truth out there. But politicians stereotypically want to hide the truth. What did you have? Did you get to interview everybody you wanted to?
We didn't get to interview everybody we wanted to. A number of the politicians within the conservative camp kind of turned us down. They weren't interested. There was an instance where we were in touch with for a while Canada's former Prime Minister Paul Martin. We were in touch with his secretary. She's the gatekeeper. You know what I mean? So you have to get through the secretary, and we submitted questions, and she was kind of just like kind of just leading us on a little bit, and we were trying to build a rapport, and then at the last minute she was just like, she just kind of put the axe down. She was like, no, not having it. And had we interviewed Paul Martin, Canada's former prime minister, we would have grilled him about during his time he had Canada had intervened in Haiti to overthrow its democratically elected leader, and we would have certainly grilled him on that. But fortunately enough, we were able to interview the foreign affairs minister and the defense minister at the time of Canada's involvement in Haiti. So we interviewed them extensively, and we got the establishment narrative. We also, a lot of the politicians we interviewed, they were retired, so they were in like consultancy. So it was kind of easier to get to their offices, kind of get in touch with them, because they did not have like that legal bureaucracy that you kind of had to go through. We did interview a foreign affairs critic, a sitting foreign affairs critic within Canada's parliament, and to even get that interview was a little tough, because you got to go through the legal field, you got to go through the legal bureaucracy, and you got to go through release forms, and they were like very critical. They want to make sure that they can sue you if they don't like what you put out. So that was the obstacle of trying to get the politicians. But we got the establishment story. There was one instrumental politician we interviewed by the name of Bill Graham. He was Canada's defense minister, foreign affairs minister. He was also Canada's leader of opposition. Briefly, he was involved in Canada's foreign policy decisions on Iraq, Canada's foreign policy decisions on Afghanistan, Canada's foreign policy decisions on Haiti, Canada's foreign policy decisions on Yugoslavia. So this guy was like involved in a whole mess of things. So he was absolutely instrumental in terms of getting the establishment line. And we were fortunate enough to get him.
Do you think that the line just gets made up along the way? Is there a conspiracy, or does the left hand not know what the right hand's doing in terms of some of the? Because I remember you said in an interview, you said, "Well, I didn't." At some point, I interviewed a guy, and I realized that maybe he just didn't know that what he was doing was wrong. Did you find that to be true most of the time, or do you think there is such thing as a conspiracy?
The whole premise of this documentary series, the first scene of the documentary series, it starts out with Noam Chomsky, who we were fortunate enough to interview. He looks right into the camera, and he says, the people in power already know the truth. It's the powerless that don't. So it's basically our responsibility to educate the powerless so that they can mobilize and they can challenge those in power. So we have to speak truth to the powerless, not truth to the powerful. This saying that we hear about speaking truth to power, Chomsky says it's useless because the powerful already know the truth. You don't have to speak truth to them. They already know it. You got to speak truth to the powerless. So that was the whole, theme, the theme underlying this documentary series is you got to speak truth to the powerless. So when we were interviewing these politicians, I assumed that they already knew what they were saying was BS, but it didn't occur to me until I interviewed Bill Graham, who was Canada's foreign affairs minister, defense minister, was involved in Iraq, our foreign policy decisions on Iraq, Afghanistan, Haiti, Yugoslavia. So, this guy was, had like a wealth of experience in terms of executing and promoting Canada's foreign policy. And I'm interviewing him, and I'm grilling him about Haiti, Canada's intervention in Haiti. And for every interview we did, except the one we did with Bill Graham, for every interview we did, we never actually challenged the politicians we were interviewing. Bill Graham is the only politician we actually challenged. And the reason why I challenged Bill Graham is because I knew Bill Graham personally, because I was a student at the Monk School. Bill Graham is a huge presence at the University of Toronto. He has a foreign policy center at the University of Toronto. Bill Graham and his wife, generous donors to the University of Toronto. So I knew Bill Graham personally at the Monk School. And so I knew we were trying to get an interview with him for a year and a half, but he had health issues, and that was preventing us from being able to get that interview. But we were trying with the secretary, just going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Finally, we get the interview, and I know that he's very close to death, and I knew that he had this horrendous record on Haiti, but he had never been challenged on it. So I knew I would probably be one of the last people to interview him. And when we released our documentary, he had died about 2 or 3 days later, so he never got to see it. But the reason why I said I got to break away from the way that I conducted my previous interviews with politicians, and this one and only time I got to challenge this guy, was I knew that I felt that he should be challenged on his record on Haiti and on a whole other series of issues, but most importantly Haiti, given the destruction, the countless number of victims as a result of Canada's intervention in Haiti. So I was like, I gotta challenge this guy, So I'm challenging him on a whole host of issues, but he was particularly bothered about the way I was challenging him on Haiti. And when the cameras were off, this guy has no reason to lie to me. Throughout the interview, he was presenting this establishment line, the Canada, what we did. We were trying to, Jean-Bertrand Aristide, Haiti's democratically elected leader. He was this thug, this monster. The people did not want him. Canada did a good thing by, kicking him out. That was the establishment line that he was presenting. And, I was challenging that line by saying Jean-Bertrand Aristide, he increased the minimum wage. He tackled the HIV/AIDS epidemic during his presidency. There were more schools that were built in Haiti than any other time in Haiti's history. So I'm challenging him on this front. And then once the interview's over, he's just kind of just like, just confused and just like exasperated, and he just says, do you know how hard we tried to get Aristide out of this country? He's saying to me, like, we did a favor to this guy. And so and then he says to me, one day I was walking down the street, and a group of these Canadians came up to me, and they heckled me, and they said, "You're a war criminal for what you did in Haiti. You're a war criminal." And then I'm looking at him telling this story. Now the camera is off, right? He has no reason to lie to me. There's no point in him to lying to me. So I'm looking at his face, and his face looks very pained. I can tell this guy genuinely, when he says that, what I did in Canada, it was a good thing. He genuinely believes it. So, when he died, I was reflecting on this. We had just released a documentary series. I'm like reflecting on my interaction with him, and I just kind of came away feeling a little sorry for him. Like, he genuinely believed the horrendous things that he did, like, in Haiti especially, but also in all these other places like Afghanistan, Yugoslavia. He genuinely believes what he did was a good thing. He doesn't realize that he has all this blood on his hands, and I kind of felt sorry for him. But that really challenged the perception of, whether the powerful actually do know the truth, because Bill Graham was so powerful. I don't think he knew the truth, and he wasn't certainly willing to listen to it. I remember at one point when I was doing the interview with him, I kind of had this moment where I was kind of like, I'm listening to him give these responses, and he seems so genuine. So I'm trying to explain to him the historical reasons as far as Haiti is concerned, the historical reasons as to why Haiti is currently the way it is, with respect to the fact that France, Haiti's former colonial occupier, in return for Haiti becoming the first Black republic in the world, France made Haiti pay for the slaves which France was letting go, pay for the Haitian slaves which France was letting go. So Haiti had to pay millions upon millions of dollars. This had indebted the country for decades and decades, and that's one of the main reasons why Haiti was so impoverished. And Jean-Bertrand Aristide, while he was president, he said that he demanded Haiti pay reparations. He had calculated reparations in the billions of dollars and said, you have to pay reparations. What you did was unjust. We had to pay for our freedom unnecessarily. We want to use this money to invest in our people so our people can grow and flourish. So I'm telling him this, and he's like, I don't know about Haiti, and I don't know about any of that. He's totally dismissing it. So I'm like, and it just kind of took me back a little bit. He did not want to hear the truth. Anyway, he was so convinced about his frame of mind and what he believed is the only thing to be right. So that was a revelation to me.
Sure. Well, capitalism is a death cult. And in order to get your followers to drink the Kool-Aid, you got to drink the Kool-Aid yourself and get everybody on board. You got to believe that lie that, hey, we're colonizing and expanding and imperialist because that's just what we do, and we believe in it, and because otherwise, where are we going to get T-shirts?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Canada's, the largest blank T-shirt making company in the world, Gildan Activewear. They use Haitian sweatshops to make their T-shirts. So when Aristide, when he was president of Haiti, he had increased the minimum wage in Haiti, and the Gildan Activewear, the Canadian blank T-shirt making company, did not like this because they would have to pay the Haitian laborers, those sweatshop workers, more money. So, and that's yeah, exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. So, and this brings me to my next question, which is, Canada's politics. Like most, we're talking about business interests. And in your film, you really start naming stuff that I don't know about Canada and what their business interests, corporate interests are. What are they? And how does that affect the politics?
I mean, the role of finance in Canada's foreign policy is absolutely instrumental. It's like a core thread that kind of underpins and underlies a lot of our foreign policy decisions. I mean, we devote an entire episode specifically to this issue, but it's an underlying current. In episode 2, it's called the role of finance in Canada's foreign policy. We talk about how, for instance, Canadian pension plan, the Canadian pension plan, Canadians' pensions, the government invests those pensions in companies like Lockheed Martin and all these weapons manufacturers, some of the top weapons manufacturers in the world, so that they can yield a profit. So in a way, Canadians, if you're a taxpayer, you're employed, you're complicit in this, because we're in the Canadian government is investing our money in some of the most polluting, the oil companies, tobacco companies, mining companies, weapons manufacturers, and we list out the names, and we call them out straight out. So that's just one instance. Another instance I've discussed is Canada's support for Indonesia and during their invasion and occupation of East Timor. That was a relationship because of the money that Indonesia, the Canadian mining companies wanted to get in there, and nickel mining companies. We wanted money. Indonesia was a promising developing nation that was an economic source for Canada. So we ignored its atrocities in East Timor. We even provided weapons to Indonesia because Canada is we're a weapons manufacturer. We make a lot of money doing that. We even talk about Canada's currently Canada's support for Saudi Arabia, the fact that it sold arms to Saudi Arabia. We interview Canada's ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Canada's most recent ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Dennis Horak, and we ask him about this, and he justifies it. He says, the question is, yeah, sure, there are allegations of atrocities, but if you, do you want to have a weapons industry or don't you? That's what he says. But we point out in this docuseries as well. We interview Richard Sanders, who's a peace activist, who's been championing for demilitarizing Canada for over 30 years, and he points out that you can actually generate more jobs if you invest in the public sector, invest in housing, education. You can invest more jobs that way instead of the military industry. So we look at this role, about Canada's role, in terms of influencing the finance and how that goes into militarism and all these other, how that goes into climate, oil companies and climate, how that affects climate change. So we challenge that on a number of fronts.
I loved to see it in the movie too, and I was really shocked not understanding that minerals, oil, and defense pretty much rules the corporate and resource side of things. And I thought, wow, I had no idea that Canada was so busy with these kind of useless things. It's a shame. It's a shame to know that there's no nice place in the world now. Everybody's got a bit of blood on their hands. But the Europeans and Americans and all those kind of people, the best colonialist douchebags you could possibly ever have. So Canada's always following the U.S., just right behind. What was the role that they played with the apartheid states in South Africa, and also what they're doing now in Israel as far as this kind of military support, or what's going on there?
So I think it's, so many people kind of just dismiss Canada's foreign policy as just us, Canada just being a puppet of the U.S. And there's a significant portion of that, which is true, where Canada, we just kind of follow the U.S. But it's also, Pierre Trudeau, who was Canada's former prime minister, the father of Canada's current prime minister, Justin Trudeau. Pierre Trudeau once said that, comparing Canada's relationship to the U.S., that Canada's like a mouse and the U.S. is like the elephant, and every time like the U.S. stomps, the mouse, like we feel every, the reverberations, every twitch. Comparing Canada's relationship with the U.S., a large part of that is true, but it's also important to recognize that Canada has its own interests as well. So, for instance, Canada's decision to support Indonesia during Indonesia's invasion and occupation of East Timor, Canada was doing that because of the significant economic opportunities that it saw by investing, Canadian mining companies investing in Indonesia, selling weapons to Indonesia. Same thing right now with Canada's relationship with Saudi Arabia, selling arms to Saudi Arabia, even though Saudi Arabia is carrying out this horrendous assault in Yemen. The United States isn't telling Canada to do that. Canada's doing that on its own. Canadian mining companies are in Latin America and Africa. They're completely devastating villages, poisoning ecosystems. The United States isn't telling Canada to do that. Canada's doing that because there's a lot of money to be made by exploiting, extracting those resources. There's a lot of money to be made by Canadian mining companies. So the United States isn't telling Canada to do this. We're doing that by ourselves. In terms of Israel-Palestine, Canada, if it wanted to, it could take a leading principled opposition, certainly in terms of UN votes, by voting with over 100 countries in support of resolutions that are criticizing Israel's occupation, of the Palestinian territories, Israel's settlement activities. Certainly, Canada could vote in favor of that. The Jewish lobby is not that strong in Canada. The Jewish population, it's like less than 2% in Canada, actually. So we do have a Jewish lobby, but it's not that strong, not like the U.S. So if Canada wanted to, it could take a principled stance in terms of opposing Israel's actions and atrocities. And the reason why we don't, it's because Israel is a settler colonial country. Canada is a settler colonial country. There's a bond there in the sense that, Israel was founded on the dispossession, the suppression, the expulsion of the indigenous people.
It's like two frat book guys that are both like date rapists having something in common. It's like, you guys are horrible.
Basically, yeah. And in terms of South Africa, why we supported South Africa, it was the same thing. In terms of South Africa, they were controlling by. They were governing by expelling, by suppressing, subjugating the indigenous black population. In fact, when the white minority South African government officials from that government came to Canada, and they were looking at Canada's residential schools. Canada's residential schools are schools where we used to house indigenous children. After we separated indigenous children from their parents, we would house indigenous children. We would impose Christianity on them, wipe out their language, their culture, completely just wipe out their traditions. We housed them in these residential schools. And the white South Africans came to Canada, and they were impressed, and they used that as a model of how they could subjugate the indigenous black people. So there's that bond there, there's that settler colonial bond. And there was also an economic relationship with respect to Canada and South Africa. We had a free trade agreement. Canada had a free trade agreement with South Africa. We discussed both of South Africa and Israel in our docuseries, episode 3, Canada's support for apartheid in South Africa and Israel. And South Africa, Canada had a free trade agreement. Canada was selling weapons to South Africa. Canadian businesses were investing in South Africa and exploiting the black cheap labor force in South Africa because it was such a profitable thing to do. So there's also that economic relationship in addition to that settler colonial relationship. And in terms of our support for Israel, once again, I think the overriding factor is the settler colonial relationship, but we also do sell Israel arms as well. And that's also very profitable. And Justin Trudeau continues to vote against resolutions that are calling for Israel to be held accountable for its settlement building, for its occupation. So that's that's practically the relationship, unfortunately.
Well, we can stop saying Israel. Let's just call it what it is. It's Palestine. So post 9/11, Canada was also helping a lot in the illegal war in Iraq, which America started under false pretenses and have yet to be gotten in trouble for. What was the position of Canada at the time?
So publicly, Canada came out. Jean Chrétien, the Prime Minister of Canada at the time, came out in opposition to the war, in opposition to Canada joining the war. He didn't directly criticize the U.S., but just said that Canada will not join unless there's a UN Security Council resolution that is that has been voted on, authorizing this intervention under international law. So that was Jean Chrétien's position in public. Privately, Canada was providing covert support to the United States during its invasion and its horrendous slaughter in Iraq. So Canada, for instance, was providing arms to the United States, which the United States was using in Iraq. We had Canadian generals that were in Iraq, commanding missions in Iraq, supporting the United States. So Canadian military generals were part of the U.S. Coalition of the willing in their invasion and occupation of Iraq. American aircraft that was flying through Canadian airspace, ready to bomb Iraq. We allowed those jets, those military jets, to come through Canadian airspace, even though we knew they were going to bomb Iraq. So we provided that air support as well. So there's just a whole host of areas where Canada was quietly providing the United States support during its invasion and occupation of Iraq. But to the public, it's like, Canada, we're special because we said no to the war in Iraq. We didn't participate in this imperialism, and so we got this chip on our shoulder. But even though that's not really true, so.
Well, we all like to delude ourselves to some degree. Human beings are the best at it. We tell ourselves that we're not ruining the environment. We're not doing this and that. Oh, contraire. So, and I heard you talk in other interviews, we were talking about South America and Venezuela and how Canada might be changing its mind about that.
So Canada is part of what's called the Lima Group. So the Lima Group, it was founded during Venezuela's economic crisis under Nicolas Maduro, and Lima Group was founded on the pretense that we want a peaceful solution to this crisis. Really, the main goal of the Lima Group is to oust Nicolas Maduro and get Juan Guaido in power. And the reason why is because Juan Guaido, he represents the interests of Western nations. Canada has mining interests in Venezuela. The resources of Venezuela, the Western-led companies, we want to exploit those resources. And Nicolas Maduro and Hugo Chavez weren't receptive to letting Western companies come in and have their way and just completely rape and pillage, and they weren't supportive of that.
They were largely socialist, right?
That's right, yeah. And so Juan Guaido would be more receptive to that. He is the Western-backed boy, So the Lima Group. So the Lima Group was set up to get Nicolas Maduro out of power, to exploit the economic crisis that Venezuela is, undergoing, and they've been largely unsuccessful. Now, their countries, Peru itself has said that they don't really want to be part of the Lima Group anymore. So now the Lima Group is kind of becoming without the Lima in it. And Bolivia, and now Brazil with Lula da Silva coming back into power. So it's two other countries have actually resigned from the Lima Group as well. So this mission by Canada, the U.S. to oust Nicolas Maduro, it's it's proven to be very unsuccessful. And now, we see with the case with Russia and Ukraine, their invasion of Ukraine, it's halted Russian oil supply to Europe. And Nicolas Maduro had a meeting with Emmanuel Macron. It was posted on Telesur, which is the Venezuelan TV network, and Emmanuel Macron was like, "We got to repair our relationship."
Look who comes crawling back.
So so now Venezuela, there's a potential avenue for a possible Western cooperation. So I think it's largely.
I'm proud of them for staying as long as they did, and I hope what they call the pink tide, which is socialist governments, will come back and make a big difference, because I think capitalism is horrible and colonialism is horrible, and this is the hegemony of the United States and them, like the banana republics of the early 20th century, that they're still trying to get other countries to make their stuff for them in a discounted fashion and stuff, and it needs to end. So what else was going on as far as conflicts that were missing? Famously, the USA had a bunch of CIA coups in South America and Central America. What were there other conflicts that Canada played a role in that people are unaware of?
So, in the case of Africa, in the case of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, it's supposed to be, one of it is actually, in terms of resources, probably the richest country on the planet. Really, like our phones, like the car batteries, all of that comes from the mineral resources of the Congo. And in 1960, there was Congo had gotten its independence from the Belgians. The Belgians were absolutely ruthless and vicious colonial occupiers. They had slaughtered thousands of Black Congolese people, just imposed just a brutal form of slavery on the Black Congolese people to extract mineral resources, which then would be used by the West. The mineral resources that were from the Congo were used to drop atom bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So it's a very, it's actually the richest country in terms of resources, on the planet, the Congo. So Patrice Lumumba, he and the Congolese, they had helped liberate the country. Congo becomes independent. The Belgians are out, and he's democratically elected by the people. And Canada, a Canadian peacekeeper, plays an instrumental role in his assassination, because what Patrice Lumumba was advocating the resources of the Congo benefit the Black Congolese people, and he had called out the Belgian occupiers for in his Independence Day speech. While the Belgian occupiers were sitting right there, he called them out for the horrendous atrocities that they had committed, and this was what set the match for the fact that Patrice Lumumba, they said he has to be ousted. He's not going to be cooperative to Western interests. So Canada played a significant role in that. And I discussed about Haiti, but in the case of Haiti, Jean-Bertrand Aristide, he was the first democratically elected leader of Haiti. He was a Catholic priest who had a strong resonance with the poor people of Haiti. And he had founded this party called the Lavalas Party. And his whole agenda was that the poor people, we should live with a sense of dignity, and so he had, there was a democratic election in the 90s where a lot of people, there was this Western-backed leader, this Wall Street-backed, Western-backed leader, and then there was Aristide, who was running on the ticket as well. And a lot of Western governments, they didn't think anything of the election. They were like, our Western preferred candidate will win as usual. But they had totally underestimated the election, and suddenly Aristide becomes victorious and he becomes president. This man who's an ally of the poor becomes president, and he disbands the Haitian military, which was a U.S. trained military that was committing horrendous atrocities in Haiti, just killing Haitians, torturing and brutalizing Haitians. He disbands the Haitian military. He also builds schools. He tackles the AIDS, HIV epidemic. He improves the literacy rate of Haitians significantly. So he's doing all of these policies, and it's being even praised by the World Bank. The World Bank is praising Aristide as being a significant figure that's actually tackling corruption. So he's a very popular figure. He's initially ousted by Haitian rebels in the 90s. He comes back to power in 2000 for a second term. He's democratically elected once again. He comes back into power, and he's once again carrying out these policies of increasing the minimum wage. He's calling for Haiti's former colonial occupier to pay reparations, and this is a significant issue where France is opposed to this. And now we see, because the New York Times has also released interviews from French diplomats who said that they were relieved that Jean-Bertrand Aristide was ousted from power, because this took significant pressure off for us actually having to pay reparations. And a French diplomat said this. France took a role in the coup in 2004, where Jean-Bertrand Aristide was ousted from power. Canada militarily intervened, participating with the United States. Canada did not like Aristide. He had increased the minimum wage, and Canadian companies like Gildan Activewear, the blank T-shirt making company, did not like this. They did not like having to pay more money to Black Haitian sweatshop workers. So Canada plays an instrumental role in securing the airport where Jean-Bertrand Aristide, he had been kidnapped. A plane was secured. He and his wife had been kidnapped. A plane was secured to take them out of the country. And Canadian peacekeeping troops were in there committing horrendous atrocities. Democracy was basically dismantled. There were thousands of elected officials under Aristide. All of that was wiped out. They were replaced by Canadian appointed officials who would follow the Canadian line. And the reason for doing this is because Aristide was setting a bad example. Aristide, if a poor country like Haiti can significantly, develop, can educate its population, can improve its economy, that sets a bad example for countries like, like Nicaragua, those countries that might start to emulate that behavior, and then Mexico might start to emulate that behavior, and this significantly affects Western economic interests. So we got to take out Aristide because he poses a bad example. So that's all.
Yeah,
those are just.
You find this is right out of the fascist imperialist playbook as far as trying to get the U.S. backed person that they want. And then they're constantly at odds with socialist governments. And if they can't get their way with the socialists, and the socialists become populist and they become popular with everybody, then they go in there and try to kill them.
Yeah, I mean, we actually, in the first episode, we talk about how Canada was the Canadian Prime Minister at the time, William Leon Mackenzie King, during the lead up to World War II. William Leon Mackenzie King was friends with Adolf Hitler because Hitler was a staunch opponent of socialists, communists. He was William Mackenzie King, Canada's prime minister, said, Hitler, he had went to visit Hitler in Germany, said Hitler's a friend. He's a good friend. He's like Joan of Arc. He's really, keeping the fascists and the communists and the socialists out. He's doing a good thing for Europe, a good thing for Germany. So the reason why Canada and countries of the U.S. initially were supportive of Hitler before they opposed him is because Hitler was playing an instrumental role in weeding out socialists and communists. So in that sense, Hitler was our friend. And it wasn't until that Hitler had invaded Poland and all of that happened that Canada, the U.S. finally took opposition and ended up going to war against Nazi Germany.
Sure.
But certainly plays from the fascist playbook, because we were supporting a fascist tyrant like Hitler precisely because he was eliminating socialists and communists, people who want to take control of resources to benefit the people.
Famously, lots of people from America, 2 politicians during that time, would go over and they said, "Oh, fascism, this thing is happening over there. It's new, it's interesting." And Hitler was doing it under the title of socialism. He was calling himself socialist, so far from what we would say today, this is the kind of socialism we're looking for. But, this was a thing that happened where it said, hey, fascism is great. You can silence all the dissidents, and you can go ahead and let industry do whatever it needs to do, and let government do whatever it needs to do, and nobody can ever question power then. And luckily it fell out of fashion for a few decades before. Now it's coming raging back in style. Fascism is alive and well all over the place. And so I guess that's my final question to you is, do you think there's any hope for the future? And how do you stay calm in a world becoming increasingly unhinged and out of control?
Well, we hope that there is hope for the future. One of the main reasons why we made this docuseries free to watch, it's free for anybody around the world, in any part of the world, to watch for free, truthtothepowerless.com, is we wanted this to be an educational resource, which anybody who is curious about Canada's role in the world, they've heard that Canada is like a peacekeeping country. Is this true? If anybody has some spark of curiosity, they can, really see that we tackle a significant major issues on Canada's foreign policy, and it's for free. It's out there as an educational resource. So we hope that Canadians, as well as individuals around the world, who by seeing this resource become educated and become part of become part of the community that's challenging those in power, challenging the politicians in power to actually represent the interests of the working class and not the corporations and the 1%. So that's what we hope happens with our documentary series. So I think the fact that we are putting this out there, we want it to be widely accessible. That is our our desire, our hopeful, our optimistic vision.
Where is it again? Where do you go find that?
Truthtothepowerless.com.
Truthtothepowerless.com.
That's right.
That's right. Truthtothepowerless.com. If you say it 5, 10, 6, 7, 8, 9, 20 times, it'll sink in maybe. Truthtothepowerless.com. This is an amazing series. And when people, if you want to support him, because he's doing it pro bono, he's doing it for free, find out how you can donate money to see more hard-hitting journalist endeavors and films and whatever else you got going on in the future.
Thank you so much.
Anything you want to add before we go?
No, I think that's it. Thank you so much. This has been an amazing opportunity. Thank you so much for having me and for promoting our docuseries.
Yeah. Well, I got a new filmmaker friend, Pitasanna.
I got a new friend, Chris.
Yeah. All right. Wave goodbye to everybody out there. Bye.